Hey guys, so we're here with part 6 of Fahrenheit 451, pages 37 through 45. So we'll start with vocab as we always do. So our first word is ravenous, and it says his hands were ravenous and his eyes were beginning to feel hunger, as if they must look at something, anything, everything. Ravenous just means like you were like insatiably hungry, like you're Patrick Star and you're trying to eat, oh, you're just like ravenous, you could eat 800 gajillion Krabby Patties, right? Ravenous just means you're like overwhelmingly, it's just a better way of saying like very, very, very hungry. Okay, zinc oxide. So this one's very specific. So he tried to count how many times she swallowed, and he thought of the visit from the two zinc oxide faced men with the cigarettes in their straight line mouths. So when we talk about zinc oxide, it's usually, I don't know if you've ever seen like lifeguards sometimes will do zinc oxide on their nose to keep it from getting sunburned. It's usually used as a sunblock, but in this instance, he's saying the two zinc oxide faced men. So these are referring to the men who came and pumped Mildred's stomach. They didn't have zinc oxide actually on their faces, but he's saying that they have that coloring. So they were basically like pale, pale, pale white. They didn't have actual zinc oxide, but they looked like they did. Okay, and then next he's talking about Mildred, and he says, or rather a little girl lost on a plateau where there used to be trees. So a plateau is a geographical feature where there's kind of a mountain and then it comes to like a flat top. Like if it's, imagine a mountain that the top was just cut off, that's going to be a plateau. It can also be referred to, if you are into like working out, you might have heard like, oh, you've reached a plateau. You're kind of like stuck at a certain point. You can't keep like improving from there, or it like levels out for a bit before you improve more. So a plateau can also be referred to in that way. A centrifuge. So Montag says, when it was all over, he felt like a man who had been thrown from a cliff, whirled in a centrifuge, and spat out over a waterfall. So a centrifuge, it's usually a piece of lab equipment. As you can see in the GIF, it spins things really fast to separate out the ingredients. If any of you are interested in like NASA or space or anything like that, the trainer they do where they like swing the person around in like a little pod on the end of that long armature, that's also a centrifuge. So it's anything that spins things around very quickly and relies on centrifugal force to separate things. This is one of my favorite words. You drown in music and pure cacophony. So cacophony is just a mishmash mess of noises. So it means it's a bunch of dissonant sounds that just kind of sound like chaos. So that is cacophony. Moving on to our literary elements. So we're getting into the big one, plot. You cannot have a story without plot. So what is it? It is a sequence of events inside a story which affect other events through the principle of cause and effect. The main events of a plot can be thought of as a series of sentences linked by and so. So you're moving between these elements of plot. We're going to look at the diagram in just a second. But without the structure of a plot, your story is kind of aimless, right? It doesn't have a clear beginning and ending. It doesn't have motivation for your characters. It doesn't have any reason to be. So a plot is really your story's reason for being, the whole reason that you're telling the story. So its purpose, kind of like I said, it focuses attention on important characters and helps define their motivation. It connects the events of the story in an orderly manner. Without plot, you're kind of like, wait, why did that just happen, right? You need it to make the story make sense. It builds the story to maintain the reader's interest, concludes the story logically to give readers a sense of satisfaction. Without that nice resolution at the end, you're kind of just like, what? A cliffhanger? What? So a good plot ends with some sort of definitive conclusion. So here's that pyramid. So we start with exposition, and that's kind of like where we set the groundwork for the story. Then something happens. The tension builds, and then some big event happens that causes kind of like a major impact on all the characters. Then we see the fallout of that. There's usually some sort of like resolution, and then there's it comes into kind of the conclusion of the story. So the introduction, beginning of the story, it's where we start learning about the characters, the background, the setting. So in Fahrenheit 451, our introduction is when we meet Montag. We kind of get to know a little bit about him, his job, his early conversations with Clarice help us learn more about the society that they live in. We meet the other characters, Mildred, Captain Beatty, we begin to get a sense of what this world is like. Rising action. So this is when things become complicated. The conflict is revealed. In this story, that would kind of be when Montag is starting to question everything because of Clarice's influence. And this is what's leading to that climax point where things are going to kind of fall apart a little bit. It's that big turning point of the story. And then finally, with falling action, that resolution begins and everything kind of starts to fall into place. It may not be super tidy, but there is some sort of resolution, some sort of conclusion. And then finally, the final outcome of events in the story. Sometimes there is no conclusion, like there's just cliffhangers. And that's a literary choice. Like an author might just choose to leave it on a cliffhanger without a nice tidy ending. But as humans, we want that conclusion. We want that, like, let's wrap it up. Okay, so just a quick summary of what happened in part 6, just so we all know where we are at. So after seeing the lady basically self-immolate and burn herself with her books, the firemen are kind of shaken up. They're all kind of just quiet and maybe questioning things a little bit. And the fireman who's driving the fire truck is so distracted he drives past the firehouse. So Montag returns home and he's just kind of like in a trance state. He's kind of like a little zombie. And Mildred's annoyed by how he's acting strange. She's kind of like, what's wrong with you? And he goes to bed and he's awake, but he's just lying in bed. And she's trying to talk to him and she's kind of like babbling on. And Montag is in bed crying. And he kind of, not only is he upset because of the lady burning herself with her books, but he finally realizes that he has no connection to Mildred. Like, she might as well be a stranger. He doesn't feel affection for her. He doesn't feel love for her. He doesn't really even know who she is anymore. So he kind of has that moment of like, oh my gosh, I don't even know who this person I'm married to is. He asks her if she knows how they met, and she says she doesn't remember, which is really upsetting for Montag. And he really, really tries to remember as well. He becomes angry at Mildred, and he calls her a silly, empty woman. And he feels like they're in their own world. Excuse me, you guys. He feels like they're in their own worlds, and hers are just kind of the parlor walls. Like, she just lives in that box, and it's really hard for him to become part of her world when it's so full based on that TV family already. Montag doesn't like going in that room. It's too loud. There's too much stimulus. And finally, he asks Mildred if she knows what happened to Clarice because he hasn't seen her in a while. And sadly, she tells him that very casually, oh, she was hit by a car. She's dead. That was a couple weeks ago. And the family's moved. And Montag is kind of like, what? Like, that's a total shock to him, right? And his wife is kind of like, well, why do you care? Like, they were just neighbors. It's whatever. She doesn't quite get why he's so upset, which makes sense. We wouldn't expect her to. So, and that is where this section closes out. I will see you guys again soon for part 7.